Yo, what's good, everybody? It's your boy Slim, aka Mr. Different, back with another video. Your favorite nappy hair rooster with a twist, brought to you by the guys at Musician Goods, your one-stop shop for all music apparel, hoodies, and stuff like that. Nice t-shirts. You might want a couple of instruments. They also got a nice little standalone drum stand as well if you use the MPC or the machine. Definitely check them out if you're into that kind of thing. They got everything you need. Today's video, because I'm back. I know I've been gone for a little bit. You guys have missed me, but I'm back once again, bringing you guys some more videos. And today, I'm going to do a little bit of a basic video. Probably the next couple of videos are going to be like very studio basic, not beginner, but just basic understanding of different plugins and techniques in the DAW. Today, we're going to work on EQing, because EQing, in my opinion, is one of the most powerful plugins you can learn. EQing can drastically change your sound, and you can get instant feedback when using an EQ, and it can really help you with either recording, mixing, or sound design. So understanding EQ and having that knowledge in your arsenal on the basis of it will allow you to use any EQ pretty much and make great decisions to get a better sound very quickly. Because EQ can really get you a better sound faster than going out and buying some new gear and all that. So understanding EQ is very important. So we're gonna jump inside the FL Studio, and I'm gonna show you guys how to use EQ and just some things about EQ so you can understand it and make better choices while using it. Let's go ahead and jump inside the FL Studio top. So here we are inside the FL Studio, and I do have the parametric EQ too. Now, like I said, I'm gonna be using this one because if you understand a stock EQ, then you'll pretty much understand any EQ out there, whether it be Fab Filter, Waves, UAD, or whatever brand. If you understand the ones that come in DAW stock, then they pretty much translate, especially parametric EQs, because they're all basically the same. It's just they might have a couple of features here and there. Now, I do have a full beat because I feel like if you have a full beat, since it has more frequencies and more things going on, you'll be able to hear the sound changes very more apparent. So that's why I'm using a full beat instead of individual tracks. So I'm gonna just go ahead and play the beat, a little bit snippet of it. It's just a little lo-fi boom bap beat I made a while back. It's a good example. It has a lot of lows, highs, and all that kind of stuff. And we're gonna mess around with it because you'll be able to see what an EQ can do to the sound. Like I said, a little lo-fi, a little boom bap. That's not important. So let's go ahead and jump inside. So first off, let's talk about what is a parametric EQ and why is it so important? Well, an EQ is basically a way of controlling and altering the frequencies of a sound source. Now, most EQs go down to 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That means 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz, but we call it kilohertz when you get to the thousands. Of course, y'all should know about that if you pay attention to school. But it pretty much allows you to affect the frequency from lows to highs pretty much. So the low numbers are more in the lows, the higher numbers or the higher frequency. Now, depending on the EQ, you'll have different bands. Now, with the bands are basically points in the spectrum or the frequency range that you can affect. Now, this one comes with 7 bands. If you got something like Fab Filter Pro Q3, that has up to like 30 bands, I think. So, it just gives you more points to affect the frequency. But if you can't get by with like 7 to 8 bands and EQ a sound, then it's probably you and not the EQ. Like, that's just, you don't need that many bands to get a good sound. So that's why I like stock EQs, because they don't give you a whole lot. They give you just enough to get the job done. So, like I said, if we look right here, a band is just a point in the frequency spectrum. As you can see, we got one set at 50 hertz, one set at 136, and then just goes on and up for that. And basically, I can affect that frequency range with that band. That's all a band is. So, if anybody say how many bands you got, there you go right there. Not the actual bands like drums and all that, but, in the frequency spectrum. Now, you can either cut or boost with a band. Boosting is pretty much going to amplify or make those frequencies around that band louder. Cutting, of course, is going to make them lower. That's how it is. For example, I'm going to take this band right here and I'm going to boost real quick, and you'll hear that it's just boosting the frequencies around the 136 hertz range. And if I do the opposite by cutting, it's pretty much lowering or removing those frequencies. Now, cutting and boosting has its place. You got to figure out which one you need. If you need to enhance the sound or do you need to remove a problem area, that's what you use. Now, the next part of a band is the frequency or the Q or the bandwidth. Basically, that is how wide or how narrow the band is. So, for example, if we use a narrower bandwidth or Q, then we have a more surgical EQ. Basically, what that allows you to do is a really good way of finding problem areas. So what a lot of people do, they'll boost a lot like this, they'll narrow the Q, and then they'll sweep the frequency until they find ringing or unnecessary like sounds or resonance, and then they will cut them, and that just gives you a more surgical sound. So for example, you can hear that kind of resonant sound when I'm sweeping. That's a great way to find like bad frequencies in solo sounds. Like vocals, for example, you'll find like where the S's are or any like nasally sounds or anything like that. You boost, find the problem frequencies, and then you'll cut them, and that just gives you a more surgical, more precise EQ curve or cut. Now, if you're gonna boost, I recommend using a wider Q. Why? Because a wider Q gives you a more natural sound because you're boosting more frequencies around the center point, and this gives you a nice kind of fall off and gives you a nice kind of, I guess you could say, just a better sound because it makes it sound more natural. So, for example, if I go from, like I said, a narrow Q to a more wider Q, you can see how more natural it gets. Because it's boosting more frequencies around that area. It just gives it more natural sound. A lot of vintage EQs and stuff like that use wider Qs, and that's where you get that whole musical sound. It's because they're using wider Qs to gently roll off EQ stuff around that center frequency, so it don't sound so apparent. It just sounds more natural and more just, I guess, smoother, as you want to call it. So now that we understand the bandwidth, we understand what bands are, the bandwidth, cutting and boosting. Now it's the different shapes that an EQ can take on. Now an EQ can be a different shape. So far, I've been showing you guys the bell shape because it looks like a bell, you know. So you can say if you like a bell, you think like a bell down here with like the bottom part and the top hump. That's a bell. Now that's gonna be the most common one you're gonna be using, and then because that's what you always use when you're doing most stuff. But there are other shapes that are really important. For example, we have different version of the bell. I don't know when we do that. But then you have a shelf. Now, a shelf is exactly what it says. It looks like a shelf. Basically, what that does is it pretty much doesn't affect anything above wherever the point is. If you have a low shelf like this one, anything above this is not going to be affected. Anything below, it's just going to be put up on a shelf or boosted all together. So, for example, and the same with a cut. So it pretty much puts them frequencies behind whatever it is on kind of a shelf. That's why I say it's called a shelf, because it's like a shelf. Next, we have a notch filter, which basically just notches out everything. So it's really good for sound design and stuff like that. Really good. Notches are pretty good. Then we have a low cut or a high pass filter. Basically what this is you're pretty much passing the highs and going straight to the lows. Really good for doing vocals, cutting the lows. When they say cut the lows, usually there's like a high pass filter to cut the lows. But they also have another variant of it called a low pass filter, which basically passes the lows and cuts the highs. Another very good thing in sound design, if you want to go for that kind of telephony effect or underwater effect or stuff like that, use a low pass filter to kind of cut the highs and leave the lows alone. And also really good to get that outside the club effect as well if you're trying to do that. This is a really good one. This is called a band pad. I think it's called a band pass filter, if I'm not mistaken. But basically it cuts the lows and the highs and only leaves like the center frequencies. This is really good if you're trying to find like certain frequencies or trying to like listen in the frequencies. Most EQs nowadays, modern EQs, have this feature built in. It's called a listening function, where basically it does like a band pass and only listens to wherever the center frequency is. So you kind of see if that frequency is what you want to boost or cut. But it can be another good way of getting like the what's it called, the telephone effect as well. A band pass, pretty good. And then there are just some variants in between those, like a resonance bump, resonance filter with the high pass, low pass, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, your most common one you can use is probably going to be a bell, low cut, high cut, and you might need to use a band pass here and there, depending. Shells are very situational if you're doing like maybe mastering or if you're doing sound design. It's not really, or if you're trying to boost some of the highs from vocals, shells are really good. But like I said, most times you're going to be using either a bell, low cut, or high cut to do everything you need. And with those three, you can pretty much EQ the hell out of any sound and get a good result. So yeah, that's really it when it comes down to EQ. EQs are very simple, but can be very, very powerful. Like I said, understanding the basics will just make you a way better mixer, a way better artist, a way better sound designer, because you can really shape the sound and tailor it to the way you need to. So when you're EQing, just make sure that you just take your time, listen to what you're trying to do, and just use all these shapes to your advantage, because like I said, you can get either some really good surgical cleaning up or trying to like clean up a vocal, or if you want to transform a sound to something else and make it sound completely different, then you can use EQ to do that. So yeah, make sure you practice with the EQ, and you know, just play around with it, mess around with it. Hopefully these basic videos or basic tips right here will help you guys get a better understanding and uses out of your EQ. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy. Like always, I know who it is, your favorite nappy headed producer, not motivated by money, but the likes, comments, views. Thanks to you guys at Musician Goods. If you got any questions, leave it in the comment below. I'll try to get up in there and help out, and also leave what kind of videos you want to see next. I got a few more planned out, but if there's anything that you want specifically, leave it in the comments below. They'll relay the message to me, and I'll get cracking on this video. So hope you guys enjoy. Like always, catch you guys next video. I'm out. Yeet.